So, hello everybody. My name is Ayelet Shalev, and I'm really honored to have here hosting Amir Tibon with us today. Just a small operational detail, please keep yourself in mute and you can write your question in the chat, and that's how we can also look at them and respond later. Amir Tibon is an Israeli journalist and writer. He previously served as a political reporter for the Walla News website and as an investigator on the Uvda program in Channel 2. In January 2017, he joined the Haaretz newspaper and served as a correspondent in Washington till 2020.
Washington, D.C., right? Not to
Which
get you
Washington
guys kind of,
DC, obviously.
speaking to Seattle, I want to get that part clear.
Sure, sure. Thank you for that. Um, in late 2014, Amir and his wife, Miri, moved to kibbutz Nachal Oz next to Gaza, following a journalistic visit in August 2014. The couple has two daughters. Amir, please share with us where October 7th met you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you, Ayelet, for inviting me to speak to the community. Um, so, a month and a half ago, on the morning of October 7, 2023, my family went through quite an experience, you can say. We woke up that morning to the very familiar, unfortunately, sound of a mortar about to explode right next to our home in Kibbutz Nachal Oz, which is a small Israeli community, about 500 people, located very, very close to the border with Gaza. And we heard, the whistle and then the explosion of the mortar. And this is something that when you live in Kibbutz Nachal Oz, when you live so close to Gaza, it happens from time to time. You get used to it. And what you need to do in that kind of situation, you need to run and seek shelter, because there's only 7 seconds from the launching of a missile or a rocket from Gaza or a mortar into our community until the landing happens. And what we did that morning, we ran to the safe room in our house. Homes on the border in border communities always feature a room that is built of very strong concrete. And usually most families in that room, that's where you put the kids to sleep at night. Because that way, if there's a siren in the middle of the night or early in the morning, the parents have to run to the children and not the other way around. And so we ran to our two daughters' bedroom. The girls were still sleeping. They did not wake up from the explosions. Galia, my older daughter, is 3.5 years old. Carmel, my second daughter, she's just over 1.5 years old. And Nachal Oz is their home. This is where they've been growing, and they love the place. I'll talk about it in a second. But they were asleep, and we thought, okay, we just are gonna wait here for a while. There will be some more explosions, and at some point things will come down, and we'll just wake them up, shove them in the car with 2 suitcases that we began packing, and we'll just drive out of here. This is something that over the years we've learned how to do. And unfortunately, that's not how things played out on October 7th. About 45 minutes after we ran to the safe room because of the mortar, we began to hear automatic gunfire. At first, it was a bit in the distance. Then it got closer and closer to us. And at some point, it's about 7:15 a.m., we basically heard gunfire right outside our window. Literally somebody standing on our front porch and shooting a gun into our home, into our living room, through the window. That's how the morning started. Before I go into the rest of the story of that day, I want to tell you a bit about my community, about Kibbutz Nachal Oz. Nachal Oz was founded in 1953, 5 years after the foundation of the State of Israel. It's a small kibbutz socialist community located directly on the Israel-Gaza border. Nahal Oz, it's very important to say, is not a settlement. It's not on any disputed or occupied territory. It's completely within the internationally recognized borders of the state of Israel. The borders that the entire international community respects and that is recognized by international law. And Nahal Oz was founded at the time in the direct order of David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, who believed that along the border with Gaza, which was always a tense and difficult border for Israel, there was a need for a civilian community, a kibbutz, that will be a little closer to Gaza than all the other communities. If you ever get to look at a map of the Gaza border area in Israel, you will see that there is a series of kibbutzim, small communities along the border, and they're all in this kind of straight line. And then Nahal Oz goes a little more toward Gaza. It's a few 100 feet closer, but when you're that close, it makes a difference. The people who founded this kibbutz were idealistic 18 and 19-year-olds on a mission to create a new community on the border. Over the years, the community grew and expanded, and like I said, today it's home to approximately 500 people, and it is a relatively young community. A lot of young families like us who came there seeking a special and extraordinary place to raise your children. I know it sounds a bit weird. Why would anyone want to raise children on the border with Gaza in such a difficult environment? But when you visit Nahal Oz, when you see it with your own eyes, you immediately fall in love. I can tell you that since the terrible events of October 7, we've had a long list of military units coming in and out of our community, because right now our kibbutz is completely empty and there are only soldiers inside it as long as this war is going on. And I keep hearing from the soldiers because they contact me. Some of them stay in my house, which is empty. And they keep telling me, you guys have such a beautiful community. I want to learn more about it. Some of them say, I want to move here. I want to live here one day. It really is a special place. Very, very beautiful, very green, very serene. A lot of tall trees, a lot of healthy lawns, a lot of small, nice corners to sit down and just watch the clouds go up in the sky. I first came to Nahal Oz at a time of war in 2014. The summer of 2014, there was a long war between Israel and Hamas. It lasted for 51 days. The current war is now in its 45th day. So just to give you a sense of perspective. And during that war in 2014, Nahal Oz was officially the most bombarded place in the entire state of Israel because it is so close to Gaza and there is no Iron Dome protection, right? Iron Dome, this amazing Israeli invention, basically intercepts rockets when they fly in the sky, meets them halfway, and creates an explosion in the sky that stops the rocket. But when you are so physically close to Gaza, like our community, you don't have Iron Dome protection because there is not enough time for the interceptor to calculate the route of the rocket. And so during that war in 2014, I wanted to go to this place and see it with my own eyes and write a dispatch about it, the most bombarded community in Israel. And I thought I would find a very, very rough place, something with a place with, rough edges. I mean, how can you not under this reality? And I can say that when I got there, I was shocked to see the kibbutz. I have my own memories of kibbutzim because both of my parents are originally from those kinds of small communities in other parts of Israel. And Nahal Oz is really one of the most beautiful kibbutzim that I've ever visited and seen. It's so well maintained. Gives you such a strong sense of home and community. And I was really impressed with the people I met there. People who are very resilient and very supportive of one another and very loving and supporting. And so I visited there first as a reporter, but I kind of fell in love with the place. And after the war was over, This is in the fall of 2014. I first raised the idea with Miri, my wife, that maybe we will go and live there. We were a young couple living in Tel Aviv at the time. We both had good jobs in the city, but we thought about one day moving to a small community, place that's more, you know, quiet in a sense, where life has its own pace and where you actually get to know your neighbors. And after the war of 2014, there was actually an opportunity for people who wanted that kind of lifestyle to move to the communities along the border with Gaza that were eager for young people, young couples to come and join. And so about a month after the war was over, we actually went to see homes in Kibbutz Nahal Oz. I think we were maybe the first or the second family to move there after the war was over. We had no idea how long we will stay. We thought maybe a few months, but we both really fell in love with the place. We made amazing friends. We found a home, we found a community. And I think community is a very important thing in our world today. One of the biggest problems in the world today is loneliness and, you know, just the sense of detachment that people have. And being part of a community is the best antidote for that. We ended up staying in the kibbutz. We got married there in 2016. We did a big wedding in the pool of the kibbutz. 2017, I was offered a job by the newspaper, by Haaretz, my employer, to go to Washington, D.C. for 3 years and cover the Trump administration. And of course, I took it. I mean, as a reporter, I could never say no to that. And when our time in the U.S. was over, toward the end of 2020, we made a very significant decision. We decided that when we return to Israel, we are returning to Nahal Oz. We're going back to the community where we lived and to the home that we found, and this is where we're going to raise our daughters. We built a new home in the kibbutz that we moved to eventually earlier this year, actually right at the beginning of the year in January. And we really set our home in Nahal Oz. This is for our two daughters. This is what the word home represents. Home is kibbutz Nahal Oz, specifically the home that we built, but in a way the entire kibbutz, with everything that it has to offer. Two young girls that became used to, you know, walking to kindergarten every morning and then running after the school days over to the little kibbutz store and buying popsicles, and then sitting on a bench under a tall tree and looking at the sky and just being happy. And this dream that we lived in, and really it was a dream, even though there were difficulties. There were times when there were rockets and mortars falling on the kibbutz, and we had to leave for a few days, go somewhere else. There were difficult days when there were security alerts right at the time when we were picking up from kindergarten or going to the playground. And, you know, this is a very difficult situation when you're with two young children, two young girls, and suddenly there's a siren or an alert, and you have just a few seconds to reach shelter. It was never a picnic. It was never easy, but we loved the place. We really felt it was an amazing place for us to raise our daughters, that they were very happy there, that this was their home, as I said. And the dream that we lived in, it ended very abruptly on that morning of October 7, when we realized that the kibbutz has been taken over, really, conquered by Hamas terrorists that entered that morning and began going from home to home in our community, trying to murder people, to murder families. I think it's important to understand that the border area near Gaza is rife with military installations and military targets. And Hamas could have easily decided to only attack military installations. They could have killed, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of soldiers, taking, you know, hostages, and still be conducting a fight that is within the, you know, international rules of war. But Hamas chose deliberately to do something very, very different. They chose to enter civilian communities like Nahal Oz and to come into neighborhoods like mine and to attack homes where they knew there were families and children. I mean, we had 5 Hamas terrorists standing outside our home, firing gunshots into the house. One of them was armed with an RPG. I mean, literally standing outside our window with an RPG. And they did all this. They tried to break into our home and they shot through the windows after seeing a baby stroller next to the door. Think about that for a second. They knew what they were doing. You know, they saw a baby stroller outside the door. They said, okay, there's a very young child in this house. And then they started trying to break in so they could kill us. It was a very, very difficult day for us because we basically had to barricade with our two young daughters for more than 10 hours in the safe room, in their own bedroom. It was completely dark because the electricity fell very early in the morning. And when you shut the safe room, you basically shut the door, and there is an iron disc that separates the window from the room. So it's completely dark inside. You don't see any, not even a shred of light. And then if you don't have electricity and your cell phone battery is slowly dying because you cannot charge it, you are basically preparing for complete darkness, which is eventually where we found ourselves. Complete darkness for long hours, no food, no entertainment for the girls. My wife was smart enough to bring water into the room, but that's all we had. And we stayed like that for more than 10 hours. Our two daughters, like I said, 3.5 years old and 1.5-year-old, were complete heroines. They stayed quiet for the entire time. They did not yell, they did not cry, they did not make any problems for us. They realized, I think, they felt through our communications with them that something severe was happening. And we told them it was very important to be quiet because we didn't know if the terrorists had entered the home or not. And if they thought maybe there was nobody in this house because the doors were locked and all the windows and the blinds were shut. So we thought maybe they think there's nobody here. And it was very, very important to just keep quiet. One of the first things I did that morning, I texted my parents. My parents live in Tel Aviv, which is an hour and 15 minutes from the kibbutz. And by the way, that's an important thing to remember, right? When we talk about Israel, it is such a small country that the border with Gaza is only an hour and 15 minutes from the economic, media, cultural hub of Tel Aviv. And my parents, my father is a retired military general. They're both in their early 60s. They decided to come, take their car, just come to the border area and try to rescue us. I'm not going to go into their entire story. It's been told several times. You can read about it. You can watch a 60 Minutes segment about it. But my parents, they did come down to our area. They rescued several people along the way, which I'm very, very proud of them for doing. They rescued soldiers who were injured in a gunfight. They rescued a young couple about our age who miraculously escaped a massacre that took place that morning in a music festival that took place, about 15 minutes from our home. And eventually my father also found us. And if you want to hear the whole story, you can, read about it or watch it on 60 Minutes. But the bottom line is we were very, very lucky to emerge alive from this ordeal. And we really thank God every day for that. And at the same time, our community took a devastating hit on that day. Devastating. Out of 500 people in Kibbutz Nahal Oz, we lost 14. 14 people were murdered. One of them was my next door neighbor. Ilan Fiorentino was his name. He was, like me, a father in a young family. He had 3 young daughters. He was the security coordinator for the kibbutz, and he went out that morning to try to stop the terrorists, and he had no idea what was coming his way. Early in the morning, we all thought that we were dealing with some kind of a local limited incident. We thought, okay, maybe under the guise of the mortars, the heavy bombardment, a small Hamas cell had broken into our kibbutz, and soon the military will engage with them and kill them, and we'll be okay. What really happened is that into Kibbutz Nahal Oz on that day entered 100 armed terrorists. 100 armed terrorists from Hamas entering a civilian community. And Ilan, my neighbor, was one of the first people who engaged them and tried to fight them. And of course, one person against dozens of terrorists. It was not a fair fight, and eventually they killed him. They murdered an old lady who lived 3 houses behind me, Shoshi, a wonderful woman who would always smile to my girls when we were walking with them in the morning to kindergarten, and we would pass by our house. In one of the homes, they murdered an 18-year-old girl, Mayan. She was working in the kindergarten where my oldest daughter goes to, and the children admired her. She was a very, very smart and mature and wise and caring young woman, and her loss is tragedy for all of our community. 14 people were murdered and 5 people were kidnapped into Gaza. 5 of the members of our community are still now, as we speak, in the hands of Hamas terrorists in Gaza, including 2 young girls, sisters, ages 15 and 9. I mean, you can say whatever you want about the occupation and the settlements and the conflict. And by the way, I myself have been critical over the years of many of the policies of the Israeli government, and I have always been supportive of the securing the rights of everybody in this land, Jews, Muslims, Israelis, Palestinians. But how does any of that have anything to do with kidnapping a 15-year-old and a 9-year-old girl? Where's the connection? I mean, sorry, I just don't see it. It's been, like I said, 45 days that we've been dealing with this reality. We became refugees in our own country after that day. Basically, at 11:30 p.m., a few good hours after my father arrived to our home with a group of soldiers that liberated all of our neighborhood and all of the kibbutz. At 11:30 p.m., a bus arrived, and we left the community, and it took all of us to a different kibbutz in north central Israel, kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, close to Haifa, and they've been hosting our community very, very generously ever since. And right now we are in a limbo. We are in a waiting situation. We are, really refugees in our own country. We live in, small rooms or guest rooms or, hostels or places like that. The community that has adopted us, they opened a kindergarten for our children, and they took our older children into the schools here, and so they've been doing wonderful things for us. But obviously it's a very challenging time. Today, for the first time since October 7, it's been 45 days, I went to visit my home in Kibbutz Nahal Oz. I went there with a list that Miri, my wife, prepared of things that I have to bring with me, clothes and shoes and toys for the girls, and a specific book that my oldest daughter really, really likes. And so I went there, and it was a shocking experience to go back to my home after 45 days that I haven't stepped foot in it. I counted the bullet marks in the house, 30 bullets, through the windows, through the walls, through the doors, 30 bullets into a house where a baby stroller was standing next to the door. I personally believe that we will return to Nahal Oz. We will go back, but we're not going to do it at any price. We want to go back, generally speaking. We love this place. We believe in this place. But we had a contract with the state of Israel. And the contract was very, very clear and understood to all sides. The contract, ever since 1953, said the following: the civilians who live on the border with Gaza, in Kibbutz Nahal Oz, and in all the other kibbutzim and communities that were attacked on October 7, we protect the border. We mark Israel's border with our own feet. We live our lives there. We raise our families there. People in the community who work in agriculture literally work until the last centimeter that is within Israeli sovereignty. They literally grow vegetables up until the border fence. And so we protect the border, and the state of Israel protects us. That was always the contract, and we believed in it. Because if you don't believe in this contract, you cannot live and raise a family in a place like Kibbutz Nahal Oz. If you don't believe the military will protect you, and that if a Hamas terrorist managed to get over the border fence, soldiers will come and kill him. If you don't believe that, you cannot go to sleep at night in Kibbutz Nahal Oz. And on October 7, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu broke the contract. They did not respect their side. I can tell you, we completely adhered to our side of the contract. Everybody who was in Nahal Oz that day, for many years, upheld our side of the bargain through a lot of difficult times and through a lot of challenges. It's not easy to raise children in a place where you know that a rocket alarm means you have 7 seconds to run with them and find a bomb shelter, or if there's no bomb shelter, just put your body over theirs and pray. It's not easy to do that. And we did that over the years. We upheld our side of the contract, and the government did not. So now there is a crisis of trust. We're seeing the Israeli military currently operating in Gaza. And I know that from where you guys are sitting, it may look different from, compared to our eyes. For me, as someone who for many, many years believed in peace and still believes that in the long run, the only way to live in this land is to somehow divide it and share it. For me right now, I believe I am in a struggle for survival. I believe the military has no choice but to use the most excessive and heavy-handed force it can use in order to break Hamas, because we cannot allow a reality where people go into the state of Israel, okay, into a community that is within the borders of the country, enter homes, murder families, rape women, kill children, and live to see the light of day. That is not something we can accept. And honestly, I don't see any country in the world accepting that kind of reality. A country that does not fight back against people who come in and try to murder my daughters, it's a country that doesn't have a right to exist. I mean, what's the point of a country if not to defend its citizens? Okay, of course, I believe, there's a debate about this also in the United States, right? People who are more libertarian, they believe that the only role of the government is to, deal with issues of defense and policing. I tend to be more on the liberal side in politics, and even, social democratic in the European sense of the term. I believe a country also must provide education and healthcare, and it's supposed to take care of the many needs of the citizen in different realms. But the first and foremost responsibility of the government is to protect the citizen. Okay, this is why people pay taxes. And so a country that cannot fight back when Hamas terrorists come in and kidnapped a 9-year-old girl from her bed, it doesn't have a right to exist. And so Israel right now is fighting, in my opinion, the most just and inevitable war that we have ever fought. That doesn't mean that there should be no room for criticism. This is not my position, and actually anybody who's been following my work at Haaretz in recent weeks knows that I've written very critically on some aspects of what the government is doing and the military, and I'm not going to be shy about it, because I believe we have a responsibility to highlight and speak about failures and problems. In a sense, I carry with me some guilt that maybe I was not outspoken enough before October 7 about some of the wrongs and the failures that I was seeing in the government and in the military. And now everything has to come out. But at the end of the day, the goal of defeating Hamas and removing Hamas from control of Gaza first of all, I believe it's just and moral. But beyond that, honestly, if we don't do it, we can't live in this land. If Hamas, after doing what it did, retains control of Gaza, people will not go back to the border communities like Nahal Oz. And if people don't go back to the border communities like Nahal Oz, the next time this kind of attack will happen in Tel Aviv. So we are very, very supportive of the goal of defeating Hamas and the efforts of the military. Personally, I believe the state of Israel would have greatly benefited if right now, tomorrow morning, in the midst of the war, we would have changed the prime minister. I believe Netanyahu is an obstacle to victory. And the way he has caused division and hate to flourish inside our society is detrimental to the goal of defeating Hamas. Israel will be much stronger if we can be more unified and if there is trust in the leadership. I mean, his leadership doesn't exist in a way. He's not a leader. He oversaw the biggest disaster in the history of the country and the biggest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. And so, you know, I'm still, in a sense, worried about the direction of the country as long as he is in power. But I do believe the military, after a very, very, very difficult day on October 7, and after also being responsible for a massive failure, has managed to do some kind of a U-turn, and the commanders and the soldiers, I think many of them feel ashamed for what happened, and they are very, very determined to win. My own brother is there. My younger brother is a combat doctor in the Israeli military, and he's there with his soldiers. And I spoke to him this weekend. He told me a little bit of what he saw inside Gaza, and he told me about how determined the soldiers are to win this war. And we are determined with them. We want them to succeed. We want them to return safely. And we want to be able to go back home and rebuild our community. A bit of good news that we're expecting tonight is the possible release of a group of the hostages that we have in Gaza. We have more than 230 people being held captive there. And there is a deal in the making to release 50 something, mostly women and children. I know President Biden made extraordinary efforts to make this deal possible. And in general, I think his support of Israel so far has been incredible. And one of the finest hours of his very long public career is how he stood with Israel at this time. And I really, really hope that friends and supporters of Israel will show their appreciation for what this man has been doing. I actually got to meet him 3 weeks ago. He came to Israel. He was the first ever American president to land in Israel in the midst of an ongoing war. And he invited a group of 12 Israelis who had been impacted personally by the war to come and meet him. And I was invited, I think, because of how our family story became very famous and the segment on 60 Minutes and so forth. The meeting with him was absolutely, I would say it was almost a religious experience, because he did not speak just as a president. He spoke as a man of faith and as a man who has gone through tragedy and pain in his life. And he shared with us his family story and the losses that he experienced in his life. And he offered his condolences, but not in an automatic way, like it just rolls on your tongue, but from the heart. He emphasized with what happened to us. You know, there were people there who lost family members. There were people like myself who lost friends and neighbors and homes and, you know, the sense of security and that the ground is stable beneath their feet. And the president was so sharp and so real in his connection to our stories and to what we've been through. Very special experience. And so his support has been very, very important. But to say that I know where things go from here would be a little presumptuous. It's a very, very difficult situation. And we were also at the same time keeping our eyes focused on the northern border of Israel, where there is an ongoing risk of a major conflict with Hezbollah. I think we navigated ourselves over a period of at least 15 years into a very, very difficult corner, and now we are fighting our way out of it. I believe Israel will get out of it. I believe we will achieve the goals. But one thing that I want to end with is that the definition of victory in this war is not going to be military. In terms of military power, the IDF is 10 times stronger than Hamas and will be able to crush them. The definition of victory in this war, in my eyes, is the following: that a year from today, I can send my daughters to kindergarten in Nachal Oz and drive off to work in Tel Aviv with peace of mind. If I can do that a year from today, then we won the war. It means that the communities are flourishing and growing and enjoy security, and that we are able to raise our children in Nachal Oz again and offer them the wonderful life that they had until October 7th. And actually a much better life, because we will not accept the same kind of risks we were willing to accept before. This is the definition of victory. And in order to achieve that victory, there is also going to be a very important role for supporters of Israel and Israelis abroad. We're going to need your help as well. We want to rebuild our community, to rebuild our homes, to offer our children the best that we can offer them in this world. And right now our community is also asking our friends abroad for help. And I'll send or maybe Ayelet can send in a minute via the chat a link for anybody who wants to donate to the rebuilding of Kibbutz Nachal Oz. I personally believe that the project, the effort of rebuilding communities on the Gaza border is the most important Zionist challenge of the 21st century. It will determine the fate of the state of Israel at large. If we lose these communities, next time this happens in Tel Aviv. If we strengthen these communities and we go back, Hamas will be the loser. So if you can take a minute to look at the link that Ayelet shared on the chat, there are also options there to support which are tax deductible in the United States. And of course, we appreciate any help that people can offer. So this is where I will stop and open it up for questions. I saw already 2 or 3 in the chat, so feel free to ask or comment or share your thoughts, and I will be able to respond for the next 15 minutes.
Thank you, Amir. This is Lior. You see, one of the participants, Galit, put a question in the chat. It's more kind of like, so Amir, can you share your thoughts about any hope for future peace? Knowing the pro-peace attitude of most of the kibbutzim people, how do you and your people around you are dealing with your previous beliefs and views in the darkness of the atrocity? So you touched it a little bit, but and you touched a year from now, but how do you see peace? How do you see the process?
Yeah, this is a very important question. For several decades, the most important pro-peace movement in Israel was called Peace Now, Shalom Achshav. And that movement made some very, very important contributions over the years to the peace agreements that we signed with Egypt and with Jordan. And these were strategic achievements for the state of Israel that improved the lives of every Israeli. It also contributed to the much more difficult and not as successful attempt to reach peace with the Palestinians. And, on that front, we're still stuck. We're still stuck. The Palestinian Authority is preferable to Hamas, but it's a disaster of itself, in many ways corrupt, anti-Semitic, untrustworthy. Israel has adopted a much more extremist and racist approach. If you look at the current makeup of the government, it's a disaster. So I think we can't really talk about peace now these days, especially after October 7. October 7 was a dark day, not only because of what the Hamas terrorists did, but because of what we call the second wave. After the terrorists came through and murdered and kidnapped, hundreds, if not thousands, of ordinary people from Gaza used the situation to come into the communities, loot, steal, and some of them also participate in the murder and rape of civilians. I think for a lot of people, this was more difficult to come to terms with than the Hamas terrorists, because we always knew Hamas was a murderous organization. We never had any illusions about Hamas. I think the only person in the state of Israel who had illusions about Hamas is Benjamin Netanyahu. He had this whole stupid strategy of strengthening Hamas in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority so that there will be no need for negotiations. And he thought he could buy quiet with Hamas by giving them suitcases full of dollars coming from Qatar. We never had any illusions about Hamas. We knew there were a bunch of thugs and murderers. I think we did have a better view of the people of Gaza than what we saw on October 7, when these citizens, civilians, came into our communities and stole everything they could put their hands on and participated in many of the violent actions. This is the real point of crisis. Do I still believe that in the long run, there are millions of Jews here and millions of Palestinians, and there has to be a way to share the land? Yes, it's not even about belief, it's factual. But I don't see right now an immediate course of action that corresponds with this long-term need. I think, first of all, we have to defeat Hamas, because Hamas cannot be part of any arrangement. Okay, this is where Netanyahu got it disastrously wrong. No arrangements with Hamas. Hamas must be defeated. After that, we can take on the very difficult task of trying to find a more reliable Palestinian partner. I don't believe that partner fully exists right now. I think the Palestinian Authority is preferable to Hamas, but it's very dangerous in its own ways. And I believe in Israel. Also, the political makeup of this government is impossible to work with. So I'm not optimistic about it, but in the long run, I still think nobody's going anywhere. And we have to find a way to get along. But it will be a very, very long journey. Peace now is not really an option anymore, but maybe peace later.
Amir, can I add a personal, I asked the question, can I ask a personal follow-up?
Sure.
Okay, yes.
So can you find it, and again, I'm not judging in any way, can you find it in your heart to see what the Gazan children are going through, or can you
Yes.
see sometime in
Yes.
your future, you know, I know the people around they used to help Palestinians to go to hospitals in Israel, because personally I'm struggling, I'm very struggling
yeah,
a lot
so
with that, so that's why I'm
let-
asking you, because you live there.
This is a really important question. First of all, yes, I do feel pain and sadness over the loss of civilian lives in Gaza. Of course, I'm not seeking revenge, okay? For me, the goal of this war is to make it possible for my daughters to live in Kibbutz Nahal Oz and in the state of Israel. It's not to kill innocent people in Gaza. I think our military is operating under extremely difficult circumstances over there. This is a war that's being fought in an urban area, very dense, and Hamas is using the terrain to fight a guerrilla campaign using civilian institutions as the base for its attacks. They're using hospitals, they're using clinics, they're using schools, they're using refugee centers. They're hiding their own leadership behind a human shield of 2 million people who are concentrated in the southern part of Gaza right now. And when you fight a war in a densely populated urban area, there are going to be civilian casualties. It's heartbreaking. I'm not saying it just, kind of like to say the right thing. It really, really is. And I know that not everybody in Gaza is the people who came and looted and stole. Okay, I understand that. But I think Hamas knew exactly what it was triggering when it did this horrific attack in Israel. Hamas, and especially its leader, Yahya Sinwar, he's a man who sat in Israeli prison for many years. He speaks Hebrew. He was released from prison in the Gilad Shalit deal in 2011 when Netanyahu at the time released 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for Gilad Shalit, one Israeli soldier. Sinwar understands how Israel works. And he knew that after his people kill and murder more than 1,000 Israelis, of course the Israeli retaliation will be not, out of this world. I mean, what country wouldn't do the same? He decided to sacrifice thousands of lives in Gaza for the sheer joy of murdering an 18-year-old and kidnapping a 9-year-old from my community. How do you explain that? Okay, but this is what he did. He knew what was coming. Did he think Israel would just say, okay, they killed women and children in our communities and we're going to bomb a few command centers from the air and kill a few of their military commanders and we'll call it, we'll call it even? We have right now a mission to destroy this organization. And again, it's not about revenge and it's not about seeking to harm civilians. It's about destroying Hamas. And it's coming with a very heavy price in Gaza and also a heavy price for us. We have lost hundreds of soldiers in this war so far. And I go to some of their families. I took upon myself to try to visit the family of every soldier who was in Nahal Oz on that day and died either in the fighting on October 7 or in later stages of the war. It's an extremely difficult thing to do, to go to these families and to hug them and to thank them for the fact that, their children fought for us on that day and saved our lives from the terrorists. So it's a tragedy, and I understand it, but I don't really think we have a choice. There have been times before when I was much more critical of military operations. This time, I really don't think we have a choice.
Thank you, Amir. Rivi, one of our leading Jewish educators in Seattle, is asking something very practical. Who can be the next prime minister, or who is the right leadership that you see from your point of view?
I see that Rivi asked about the next great leader. Israel doesn't need a great leader. Israel needs a leader. Right now, we have a man who is not a leader. Netanyahu, since October 7, has refused to take responsibility for what happened. He refuses to acknowledge his own failure. He thinks everybody failed except him. We've been sitting in the kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, the community that is hosting us, for 45 days. Okay, my kibbutz is a symbol in Israel. It's a symbol of determination, of Zionist resilience, of holding onto the land. We are getting love and appreciation from Israelis from all parts of Israeli society. Right wing, left wing, center, and everything in between. Religious and secular, and Jewish and Arab and Druze. We have not heard anything from the Israeli government. Not a single representative of Benjamin Netanyahu's government has stepped foot in the kibbutz where we are staying to come and look us in the eye and say, we're sorry. We're sorry for what happened to you. Can you imagine that? Whatever you think about Joe Biden in terms of his politics, are you going to vote for him next year? I don't care about that. He came to Israel and he invited people from my community and from other border communities, and he shook our hands and he gave us a hug and he said, I'm sorry for what happened to you. Benjamin Netanyahu, for 45 days, he's the prime minister of this country. Where is he? There are a lot of talented politicians in Israel. None of them are perfect. Okay, there's no knight on the white horse. Okay, every one of our political leaders has some strengths and some weaknesses. I'm not going to go into names right now. Some of them I prefer more, some of them less. Whoever will rise to the occasion, I believe, will be better than what we have right now. We need a leader who can look the people of Israel in the eye, who can show empathy toward their own people, who can celebrate when they get an achievement, because every politician will celebrate when they have an achievement, but also take responsibility when they experience failure, because there's no political leader that never fails. We just need a human being with leadership qualities to be there. And there's more than one candidate. For me, it's not about the next great leader, it's about having a leader, period.
Thank you, Amir. Mo is asking a personal question. Can you elaborate about how your kids are doing?
Yeah, our two girls, Galia and Carmel, are very, very brave. And, you know, it's been rough for them. I mean, they went through a harrowing experience, being locked in a dark room with no food for 11 hours, hearing gunfire right outside their window, seeing their parents a little shaken, although Miri and I were trying very hard to remain composed so that they remain calm. And then in one night, leaving their home and not coming back for 45 days. Think about that, what it means for a 3.5-year-old to just leave her home one night and, from her point of view, never come back. Of course, we are planning to come back, we're hoping to come back, but she doesn't really comprehend that. I mean, it's been 45 days. It's a previous lifetime for her. They've been very brave through this, and we're seeking help of all sorts to help us be better parents during this situation. We're very, very proud of them. And, you know, we're trying our best to make it easier for them. They really like where we're staying right now. They like the fact that we are still in a kibbutz that resembles to some degree what they have known all their lives. But it's not easy. We're demanding a lot from our children. Everybody who is a resident of the Gaza border area, we are demanding a lot of our children. And that's why we feel very comfortable to demand 10 times more from the leadership and the military who have let us down. And of course, at the end of the day, we do want our children to go back to their homes, but with real security and with everything that they deserve.
Thanks. Amir, Inez is asking if you can talk about polarization before October 7th.
Yeah.
What has changed, and if I may add, what is the future of that? You know, we connected to you UnXeptable Seattle through different times. It seems like years ago. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. Listen, 2023 was the worst year in Israel in many, many years, even before October 7th. First of all, it was the year with the largest amount of people killed in terror attacks since the Second Intifada. It was a year of social instability that rocked the country and tore it apart. All of it due to the extreme plans of the government to dismantle the judicial system and give the prime minister unlimited powers. And I think the divisions that we experienced this year, they in a way are now hidden beneath the surface, because right now there is a stronger sense of unity and togetherness, because we are fighting for our lives and we are fighting to defeat a very, very cruel enemy. And I hear it from people all the time. You know, there's a sense that now we're together, now we're overcoming the differences. But these issues are not going away, because they are fundamental questions about what kind of country we want to live in. There still is support for Netanyahu, although public opinion polling showing a collapse in his support, but he's still holding into a certain base of, you know, I would say about, I don't know, 15 to 20% of the voters. And I think some of them are going to stay with him until the bitter end. And they believe now in all kinds of conspiracy theories that he and his crazy son are spreading. You know, all kinds of conspiracy theories about the military knew this was going to happen and they deliberately hid it from Netanyahu. There were people inside Israel who helped the attack. You know, listen, I can tell you about my own family, okay? My father did some very heroic, and my mother did some very heroic things on October 7th. Apart from coming to our kibbutz, and eventually my father reached our home, along the way, my parents evacuated 3 injured soldiers. and my mother took them to the hospital, and one of them, his life was saved because of my parents. And he recently, while he was in the hospital, 2 floors above him, his wife gave birth to their first son. And my parents saved a couple that ran away from the music festival and took them to safety while they were driving to us. I mean, think about it. They know that we are surrounded by terrorists in our room, and they see a young couple in distress, just ran away from a massacre, and they turn around and they take them to the police. I'm very, very proud of my parents. And after my father arrived to our house, he stayed with us for several hours until there was a community evacuation, and he helped organize the community evacuation. So everybody got out together. And all over social media right now, supporters of Netanyahu are spreading blood libels about my family, that, oh, this general took a group of soldiers, saved his family, and drove to Tel Aviv in his car. We are suing some of them. And of course, once they get a letter from a lawyer, suddenly they become good boys and girls, and they erase everything and they apologize, because they only understand, you have to understand, the Bibist movement, that's how we call it, the supporters of Bibi. It's not a moral movement. It's not a Jewish movement. It's not even an Israeli movement. It's a movement that only respects and understands power and force. And once they get this letter from a lawyer, of course, they immediately retract everything. But think about the level of toxicity and hatred toward other Israelis that it takes to slander people who saved lives and risked their own lives on October 7th. This is what we're dealing with. It's important to understand. Now, Israel is an amazing country with an amazing society. And we're seeing right now the beauty of Israeli society when people from all over this country are helping one another and supporting communities like ours that have lost their homes. And the soldiers, today when I went to visit my home, inside the home there was a letter, handwritten letter by a soldier who stayed in our house for several days. And he said, "Thank you for allowing me to stay in your house, and I'm so sorry for what happened to you, and we're going to make it up to you. And thank you for living here and protecting the border." And I said, what is this man talking about? I need to be thanking him. He was protecting our community and literally guarding my home for the last few weeks. So there are amazing people in this country, from all sorts, by the way, from all directions. I don't care, right wing, left wing, religious, secular, Jewish, Muslim, Druze, Bedouin. There are amazing, amazing people in this country. And they all deserve a leadership that appreciates their sacrifice and their effort and their contribution to this country.
Thank you, Amir. I don't see more questions coming, and I know it's 11 o'clock your
a little late
time.
here, but I really want to thank everyone who joined, and I want to thank you, Ayelet, also for sharing with people the opportunity to support our community. Really, really thank you for that.
Yeah, I see one last question in Hebrew that'll take me I'm not sure if you want to. Do you see the messages?
Yes.
So Adi is asking, the support in Bibi is going down. Do you think it'll be a more right-wing movement in Israel because of hatred as an outcome of October 7th?
I think there is some of that, but there are also factors moving it in the other direction. There are a lot of stories that have made it into the news on television, and people are seeing them, about Arab citizens who saved lives on that day. There is a story in a gas station very close to our kibbutz, where one of the workers, he's a Bedouin man, young man, realized what was happening, took people who were arriving in their cars, running away from the terrorists, into the safe room of the store, locked the store, and barricaded the door with gas balloons, the kind of like large gas balloons that you use for electricity in some places. And so when the terrorists arrived, they couldn't shoot the door open, because if they would shoot the door, they would blow up the gas and kill themselves. And he saved 14 lives like that. So I think it's a complicated situation. I think there's going to be much more suspicion of any kind of talk with, of territorial compromise with the Palestinians in the near future. But I think there's also an appreciation that we should not do the big mistake of ruling out cooperation with the Arab citizens of this country. And one of the most impressive political leaders during this last month has been Mansour Abbas, the leader of the Ra'am party, who came out very strongly against Hamas and called to release all the hostages, and watched this movie that the military put together of some of the horrors perpetrated by Hamas. And when one of the members of Knesset in his party, raised doubt about what was shown in that movie, he just censored her in a very, very tough way. There are reasons for pessimism, but there are also reasons for hope. And I think the full picture will only emerge, as events progress and we learn more about what's happening politically in the country.
So maybe the last question, what do you think about the protest that prior to October 7 was all over Israel and the world?
Right now, I understand there is no momentum for protests. We're in the middle of a war. And many of the people who took place in the protests are now in reserve duty, fighting in Gaza, fighting in the north, protecting the country. Other people, my wife, Miri, was a constant demonstrator, 38 weeks out with a sign in the junction, biggest junction in our area. Now she's busy with other things. She's taking care of her girls and trying to live in this new reality as a refugee in her own country. But the protest movement will be renewed. It will be renewed, and it will be much more forceful than before, 10 times more forceful. The amount of anger in this country over what happened is hard to grasp. And there will be a time for it as well. And there will be a role also for our friends abroad to play in it when we get there.
Okay. Actually, now this is the last question, because I think we just need to know the donation that we are asking now. What is it for? And
this is solely for the purpose of reconstructing the community in the future. This is not for immediate needs. It's not for salaries. There's no middleman. It's not going to anyone in the Jewish agency or any kind of place like that. It is solely for the purpose of reconstructing the community, physical needs, psychological needs, treatments for people, completely focused on the process of rebuilding. And it goes directly to the bank account of the kibbutz, which is controlled by a small committee of people in the community who have been appointed to decide how to use this funds for the reconstruction. So no salaries, no middleman, direct bank account of Kibbutz Nahal Oz.
Wonderful. So I put again the link.
Toda, thank you, Ayelet.
And we're going also the one that registered through the Eventbrite. We're going to send you an email with the recording and also the link to the donations. So you can do it later on in your free time, which is so important. And thank you so much, Amir, for being here and sharing all this with us. We are all heartbroken from what's happening there, and we try to help wherever we can.
Toda Rabba. Thank you so much, and have a good day there.
Thank
Goodbye.
you, everybody.